But ultimately, those dirty states get a lot of concessions from the EPA, so they can easily make the limits that have been set too.
There are something like 500 or 600 settlers that live in Hebron, in the center of the city and also right on the outskirts. For every one of those settlers, there are 3 to 4 soldiers.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. We start with some very bad news about a youth in Palestine. Iyad was shot in the leg with live ammunition last year. It was in July in Bil'in, the famed village that's been having demonstrations every week since 2005 against the wall, which cuts their town in half. The shot severed a nerve, and he was operated on last year, but the family and Mudage got the bad news this year that the operation appears to have been a failure, and that it may be that he will not have any feeling in that leg for his life. The film 5 Broken Cameras about the village of Bil'in that was nominated for an Academy Award was shot and produced by his uncle Iyad. There is also some good news. A statement by over 1,000 black activists in the United States and in other countries in support of Palestinians has been published. It makes a direct connection to the brutality that's been protested in the Black Lives Matter movement and the situation in Palestine. It supports BDS and calls for the United States government to break its diplomatic and economic ties to Israel. We'll start with some climate news. As we keep mentioning, the World Bank is predicting that by the time today's little children are grandparents, the world will have increased an average of 4 degrees Celsius. Catastrophic news for the climate. This week, the president gave his long-awaited remarks about the climate and about new limits on climate warming gases that will be coming out of power plants. And there's been a response by 2 activists who know a lot and do a lot about climate. And it was shown on the Real News, and they've given us permission to use it today.
This is the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. President Obama unveiled his Clean Power Plan this week, mandating the EPA to implement the plan to ensure that U.S. power plants reduce their emissions by 32% below the 2005 levels by 2030. Let's have a look.
Here's how it works. Over the next few years, each state will have the chance to put together its own plan for reducing emissions, because every state has a different energy mix.
President Obama said that each state gets to decide how best to meet these goals. They can invest in renewable like solar and wind, switch to natural gas, or simply upgrade coal plants to produce more electricity with lower emissions, he said. So to discuss this, I'm joined by 2 guests. First, Daphne Weisham. Daphne is an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies and the director of Climate and Energy Program at the Center for Sustainable Economy. We're also joined by Chris Williams. Chris is the author of Ecology and Socialism, Solutions to Capitalist Ecological Crises. He's a professor at Pace University in New York City at the Department of Chemistry and Physical Science. So I thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you
for having me.
So first of all, let me begin by Chris. You give me your take on the plan.
Well, for Obama to talk about having time and flexibility are the 2 things that we don't have And I would say that his plan just ratifies what's already happening in the U.S. economy. So it's neither groundbreaking nor historic, because the percentage declines in emissions from the power sector are already on track to happen as a result of wider changes to do with the low cost of natural gas and the retirement of old coal plants. And the fact that you're giving states with dirtier energy more and more time to change, and flexibility around that question, including counting nuclear power towards your clean power credits, I think illustrates that this is neither groundbreaking nor anywhere near the kind of action we need to avert dangerous climate change.
And Daphne, your initial take on this plan?
My take is very similar. It's, not only is it essentially just making a big deal out of something that was already in the works, but at the same time, we have Obama continuing with his all-of-the-above energy strategy, which includes opening up the Arctic, which is absolutely must be off limits for drilling if we're to avoid dangerous climate change, in addition to expanding offshore oil and gas drilling around the country and continuing to export massive quantities of coal. So, what we need is not, as Chris said, we don't need more time. We need a rapid scale up along the lines of a World War II type mobilization towards 100% renewable energy economy and zero emissions by 2050 if we are going to dodge this very dangerous bullet that's headed our way.
Now, one of the great challenges that the president is facing is, of course, the pushback he's getting from the Republicans and the coal-reliant states. In fact, 15 of them, including Oklahoma and West Virginia, is already threatening to take this to court, this plan. Why do you think the president has been unsuccessful at trying to convince the nation about moving forward with such a plan all these years that he's been in office? I'll go to you, Daphne.
Well, of course, the Koch brothers have pledged to spend over $1 billion on the Republican presidential campaign. There's all kinds of oil, gas, and coal money flowing into these political campaigns, thanks to the lack of limits on campaign finance spending. So that's a key issue in this, is that we just don't have the kind of money on the other side to push forward an aggressive set of policies that would actually help us avoid dangerous climate change.
Chris, your take on the pushback that the president is getting on any plans he's proposing at this time?
Actually, I think the Koch brothers are probably wasting their money, because Democrats or Republicans are in the same boat when it comes to facilitating the accumulation of U.S. capital. I don't see any real difference there. And Obama's had 7 years. This is actually a ruling that is the U.S. is legally obligated to do since 2007 in Massachusetts versus the EPA. CO2 has to be regulated as a pollutant. And so 7 years later, we get some very weak rules. And we know that previously Obama has completely downplayed, does not talk up the issue of climate change on a regular basis or explain it, why it's important, has not taken scientific reports seriously, has boasted about constructing more pipeline than any other president, has opened up the Atlantic to more drilling, and now most notoriously also the Arctic, where no drilling has ever gone on before offshore. And so I don't think it's about the lobbying. I think it's about the Democratic Party being in hoc to the corporations as they exist, so many of which the largest are fossil fuels producers. And so the percent decrease, we've already had 15% decrease in emissions from the power sector over the last 15 years, and that's because of the increase in fracking and the shift from coal, as well as the recession. And so another 15% to 2030 actually is extremely doable. The question is, how much further can we really go, and will it be undone by other changes such as increases in the size of the economy, which is not obviously ruled out, and which is advocated for by all political parties, that the economy has to keep growing. And seeing as that is mostly fueled overwhelmingly by fossil fuels, then we have to be talking about drastic changes to the way the US economy works and limits to production on fossil fuels in particular, but also new transportation networks and a whole host of other things if we're really going to take the scientists and the threat of climate change seriously. So clearly the states that get energy from dirtier sources, like Wisconsin, Kentucky, Mitch McConnell has already been talking about how he's going to ramp up the legal challenges. That's going to be actually quite difficult because it's based on the 1970 Clean Air Act and the 2007 Supreme Court case. It could delay it, but ultimately those dirty states get a lot of concessions from the EPA, so they can easily make the limits that have been set too. 17 states have already set tougher limits than the Clean Power Plan. So, I think you have to bear in mind the whole picture and put it in the context of climate change to recognize that this is an extremely underwhelming legislation.
And Daphne, you were just engaged in an action in Portland that actually speaks to what you mentioned earlier, President Obama's all of the above strategy. And tell us about the fight back that is going on in Portland.
Well, you have covered our victories in the past against the Pembina propane export terminal that we won, and that sort of set the stage for the battle that we saw happening just this last week. We were prepared to blockade with kayaks the Fennica before it departed for the Arctic. Greenpeace joined us at the last minute from the bridge in a surprise action. And so we had both the air and the water blockaded. And one of the reasons why so many groups out here are saying no and literally putting their bodies on the line is because the Pacific Northwest is the target of 5 times the Keystone XL pipeline in terms of the carbon content of the 28 projects that are on the books. 5 Keystone XL pipelines are prepared for the Pacific Northwest in the form of export projects, oil, gas, coal, tar sands, propane. And the people of the Northwest are saying no. We know that 1 Keystone XL pipeline is game over, so 5 absolutely must be stopped. And we're calling for no new fossil fuel infrastructure in Oregon as well as in the entire West Coast.
And Daphne, what do you make of President Obama's Clean Power Plan and the critique against it, where people are saying that these kinds of market-based compromise with polluting industries and relying on inherently flawed programs like cap and trade is not the best direction to take at this time?
Well, my understanding is that there is some flexibility in terms of applying a carbon tax or a fee and dividend as opposed to cap and trade. As you know, I'm not a fan of cap and trade. That being said, I think at this moment in history, what we need to do is have our targets and timetables adhere to what the science requires, not to what business and free markets require. And that will require an absolute cap both on overall greenhouse gas emissions for the U.S. economy, as well as major constraints on exports. We need to keep 80% of our proven reserves in the ground.
And now more of Octavia Tayor's illustrated talk about her visit to the West Bank. Tayor has a degree in international development and has lived in several Middle Eastern countries, including Syria and the Emirates.
So we're going to look at a few slides of what an occupation looks like. Since we were there, living in Ramallah, with access to Jerusalem, but not really access everywhere, we did have an inkling of what it was like to be limited, but obviously not as much as Palestinians are limited in travel. But there are signs and signals that show you how difficult life is and how limiting life is. So the first one, this one blows my mind and is one of the reasons that Jeff Halper could not come to the West Bank. Because if an Israeli soldier, upon Jeff's return to Jerusalem from the West Bank, if an Israeli soldier saw his passport, he could be detained, he could be jailed, any number of things. It says this road leads to Area A under the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden, dangerous to your lives, and is against the Israeli law. There are currently about 50 laws that discriminate against Palestinians in one way or another. This is one of the laws. In this case, this law is against Israeli citizens to come into Area A, but there are many other laws that discriminate in one way or another. This keeps people apart. This continues the fragmentation. It's hard to see how, with something like this and the road system, there can ever be a two-state solution. The wall, of course, the wall, you talk to people here who don't know much about the occupation, they say, well, the wall isn't all around the Green Line. Well, no, it's not. As it happens, it's mostly around built-up areas and some areas of conflict where there are checkpoints, for instance. It's a 26-foot wall. It still runs hundreds of miles. And the worst part of it is it comes inside the Green Line into the West Bank. It has appropriated some of the land that was West Bank land. So that they call them fingers that come in, especially around Ariel, the Ariel settlement, where it's taking up about 15% of the land to build this wall. They're not building it right on the Green Line. They're coming into the West Bank to build it. There are guard towers. Periodically, they're all manned by 19, 20-year-olds with heavy weaponry. This is pictures taken in West Jerusalem, and it's not uncommon for one to be sitting and having falafel, and suddenly, oh, gee, the person next to you is an IDF soldier also having falafel, except the difference is he's got his gun there, and it's a little bit intimidating. The Kalendia checkpoint was a difficult place for many people because long lines, inhuman treatment, rejection, being told to get off the bus and just not go through to Jerusalem. In this particular picture, the soldiers are just noshing. They're not really doing much soldiering, I guess. They're taking a break. But this is an unusual situation. Mostly there was yelling, there was pushing, shoving. It was a very unpleasant checkpoint to go through. This is an even worse checkpoint. This is, I believe, the checkpoint where somebody was crushed to death. Was it not, Stan, at the Iyad checkpoint? I think it was.
They have different names, so I'm not...
Yeah. This checkpoint, this is a major checkpoint for workers who work in Israel to line up. The lines start at 3:30 in the morning, and by 9 o'clock, most of the people might have gone through. But to think that somebody is putting in a full day's work standing at the checkpoint before they ever get to work. And these are people, for the most part, who have had prior permission to come into Israel to work. The colonies, this is a picture of Male Adumin, which is in East Jerusalem, on land that Israel appropriated and has happily allowed the colonies to grow and grow. The population of Male Adumin, I believe, is around 40,000 now and continues to grow. There are about maybe 120 different colonies with another 100 outposts. And outposts are, in many cases, are colonies that are considered illegal by the Israeli government. And yet, settlers settle these outposts. They consider themselves, it's sort of like the Wild West. They're armed, they're allowed to have guns, And they might start out as a couple of trailers, and they settle in, and it's all pretty wild. We had a friend who had broken down. He'd had a flat tire near one of these outposts, and Palestinian coming from the opposite direction said, "Move, do not stay here, they will come and get you." And indeed, even though he had the flat tire, he started to roll the car, and he could see that the colonists were coming down the hill with guns, brandishing guns, because they were afraid that Palestinians were going to come and attack them, I guess. I don't know. What was that noise? This is another colony, Har Homa, which is on the outskirts of Bethlehem. The reason I took this image is for this Israeli-only road. This road goes from Jerusalem to Har Homa directly. So one has, and the way you're allowed to go on these roads is different people have different license plates. So Israeli license plates are yellow and black. So you can go on any road pretty much. But if you're a Palestinian, your license plate is green and white. You have no access whatsoever to this road. And if you somehow got onto this road, God knows how, because the checkpoints would really keep you away, then you could be gunned down, and people have been. Refugee camps. This is the Al Amari camp, one of 3 refugee camps in Ramallah alone. There are 19 refugee camps in the West Bank of a population of 741,000. Gaza has 8 refugee camps with a population of 1,200,000. We wonder why Gaza, the outdoor prison, why there are troubles there, why people are desperate. I mean, they're bounded by this electric fence basically on 3 sides, and then there's a sea where they're not even allowed to go out and fish. Most of the Israelis I spoke to who were involved in any way in ending the occupation said to me that the right of return must be a part of any deal. That without the acknowledgement that people had been displaced, that their family members have a right to return, then there would be no deal. And the reality is many of the refugees have gone elsewhere, have established lives elsewhere. So you wouldn't expect 5 million people to come back to Israel, certainly. But for some people, it is really, really important to see the land, to see where they came from. Hebron is probably the most difficult place in the West Bank. I mean, bar none. It's divided into H1 and H2. There are something like 500 or 600 settlers that live in Hebron in the center of the city and also right on the outskirts. For every one of those settlers, there are 3 to 4 soldiers that protect them. Now, I know for some of you, this is not news, but it's shocking to be there, to walk on the main street or to be near the main street that used to be the main street for Palestinians in Hebron, and to realize that they are no longer able to walk there. It's closed off to them. To realize that the reason there is all this screening above the marketplace is to keep things from falling on top of shoppers, because we have here not only soldiers, but we have residences, Israeli settler residences right above that. It's just a stultifying, just so inhumane place to be, and so difficult. We met a man whose wife had been shot by Israeli settlers, not soldiers, for hanging the laundry. She was pregnant, and she was hanging the laundry on the roof, but the settlers felt that she shouldn't be there. They killed her. It's the pain is just. I'm afraid I'm not doing a justice in explaining how painful it is for people to live there. Yet they continue. This is a way to resist. I'm afraid I don't know the name of this colony, but it's got everything imaginable, water, swimming pools, everything, the works. And here we have Bedouins who rely on once-a-week delivery of water from a water truck, who don't have electricity. They rely on generators. The disparity, looking you in the face as you drive by. This is on the way to Bethlehem. It strikes you. And the Bedouins are at risk. Israel is claiming some of that land, that state land I was talking to you about earlier. Many of the Bedouins who live on those lands are being displaced, and every day there are people being displaced. House demolitions. This actually is not my image. I took that off the web, but this is happening in East Jerusalem. It happens every day. Every day people are being displaced, and we're not just talking about one house where one person might live, but there might be like an apartment house. So we're talking about many people. And in the case where, I don't know if you remember last fall, there was a Palestinian young man who rammed his car into a light rail station, and he killed a couple of people. He killed a mother and her child, who happened to be, I guess, New Yorkers. Then the Israeli army said that in retribution, they would demolish his apartment. But his apartment was part of a large apartment complex. So what happened, it wasn't just him who became homeless, it was everybody else. The other thing that's notable, the Israeli army has now, or actually it's a civil administration, which is really a misnomer, right? What's civil about destroying homes and administering that? But one of the things that this civil administration is saying is giving people a choice. Do you want to destroy your own home, or do you want us to do it for you? If we do it for you, we will charge you.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.